Hello again, everybody, and welcome back to Filthy Casuals EDH. This is your host, PDX Gamer, coming at you today with Prossh, Skyraider of Kher. This was my very first EDH deck. It was modified pre-con to begin with, so it's kind of near and dear to my heart. Has a little bit of nostalgic value to it, and it's just a fun deck to play. So yeah, I was getting pretty tired of playing Standard here a few years ago, and so just got tired of it, so I picked up this. Had heard of Commander, picked this one up, picked up another one for a buddy of mine, gave it to him for Christmas, so we could both try it out, and haven't looked back since. Quit playing Standard, pretty much quit playing everything but EDH. And this big honking mother of a dragon is one of the big reasons why. So let's take a look at him. Prossh, Skyraider of Kher, costs 3 black, red, green, so total CMC of 6. For a 5/5 legendary creature dragon. And let's take a look at what abilities he has. For that, you get the 5/5 flying. And when you cast Prossh, a Skyraider of Kher, put X01 red kobold creature tokens named Kobolds of Kher Keep onto the battlefield, where X is the amount of mana spent to cast Prossh. And his third ability is you sacrifice another creature, and Prossh gets +1/+0 until end of turn. So a lot going on here for, 6 is a lot to pay for a commander, but you get so much in return for it. So just taking a look at the abilities, there's a few different directions that someone could go with this deck. So the combination of flying and the ability to sacrifice other creatures to pump Prossh means that you could very easily go Voltron. Built-in evasion, built-in way to pump him, get up to 21 commander damage, seems like a pretty good way to go to me. So Voltron is certainly an option that you could take in building this deck. Reading the middle ability here, but when you cast him, you get to put all those kobolds into play. Well, that lends itself to playing a token strategy. He creates tokens every time you cast your commander, and the more you spend to cast them, the more tokens you get. Very efficient token generator. So you could definitely go with a go wide strategy, or you could use those tokens to go with a combo strategy. And that's what we're going to do primarily for this deck. We're going to build in a couple of alternate win conditions, but for the most part, we're going to go the combo route in taking a look at this particular deck. So our main strategy is to ramp and make sure that we have all 3 colors. We are playing a Jund deck, and we do want to make sure we have all 3 colors that we need and multiple copies of each land that produces those colors, because we do have a few spells that do cost multiple pips of the colors. We want to control the board while we're assembling all 3 of those colors, and we want to assemble our combo pieces. So definitely want to make sure that things don't get out of hand on us while we're trying to get our stuff together. Once we do assemble the combo, we're going to finish off the table in 1 turn. Now, things don't always go as planned, so we have a couple of secondary strategies that we can use here in the deck. One is we can aggro out with our hasty tokens. We have do a few ways to pump our tokens and make them pretty huge if we wanted to go that route, if we need to go that route. We could do the Voltron thing with Prossh if we need to. Or we could generate a whole lot of mana for a great big X spell finisher as well. So let's dive in and start to take a look at the card base itself, starting with our mana base. We're going to run 37 lands. Now here's our fetch lands and our fetchable lands. We have Bloodstained Mire and Wooded Foothills. Can't quite float the note on the Zendikar fetch land, but hopefully that will be reprinted fairly soon. But either one of these will let us go get either a swamp, mountain, or forest, depending on the land. And so we run 4 fetchable dual lands. We have Blood Crypt, and Overgrown Tomb, and Stomping Grounds are our shock lands that we're running. And then we have Smoldering Marsh is one of the check lands, which were the new ones that just came in, or Tango lands, I think they call them sometimes too, or Have lands. That's going to tap for red or a black. There's a Smoldering Marsh is another one. So we have 4 lands that we can get that are dual lands with our 2 fetch lands. We're also running Evolving Wilds and Terramorphic Expanse to go get basic lands. And Jund Panorama also has the ability to tap for colorless if we need. Or if we don't need to go get a particular color and we don't want to sacrifice our tempo, we can just tap for a colorless. Or if we do need a particular color, we can always go fetch it with that. Speaking of basics, we run 4 basic forests, 1 basic mountain, and 5 basic swamps. Okay, So let's start taking a look at other lands that can tap for multiple colors, starting with Command Tower. Pretty much standard staple these days. Savage Lands taps for all of our colors as well. Vivid Grove taps for a green, but we can have 2 charge counters on it, and you move a charge counter, it'll tap for any color, so we get 2 shots at producing any color we need. Opal Palace can give us any color we need as well, although it does cost 1 additional mana to do so. The nice thing about it, though, is it does add +1/+1 counters to your commander. If you use the Opal Palace to generate a color to cast your commander, you get a +1/+1 counter for each time it's been cast prior to that point. All right, we also run a few different dual lands that are multicolored lands that come into play either tapped or untapped. Blooming Marsh checks to make sure you have 2 or fewer other lands to fast land. Wooded Cemetery comes into play tapped unless you control a swamp or forest. Dragon Skull Summit's the same way, except for it's a swamp or a mountain. Hissing Quagmire and Akum Refuge both come into play tapped, but they give us some benefits in that Akum Refuge gives you a life, and Hissing Quagmire is a creature land that can become a 2/2 black-green elemental creature with Death Touch if you pay 3 mana total. We also run all 3 temples that we could run. The Scry lands are nice, especially in the combo deck, to be able to filter through your deck as quickly as you can. Golgari Rot Farm and Temple of the False God, they both ramp us just a tiny little bit. Temple of the False God we can't use until we have at least 5 lands total, and Golgari Rot Farm does cause us to return a land to our hand, so we sacrifice a little bit of tempo in order to get a little bit of ramp. Okay, here we have some utility lands. Mosswort Bridge gives us a little bit of card advantage by letting us take a look at the top 4 cards and exiling 1 that we can later then cast using the Hideaway ability. Urborg is going to give everybody swamps, turns every land into a swamp in addition to its other types. Volrath's Stronghold adds a colorless, or we can use it to recur creature cards from our graveyard to the top of our library. And Westvale Abbey will produce not only a colorless, it comes into play untapped, but we can create tokens with it, or we can sack creatures to it to change it into a 9/7 flying haste, indestructible, lifelink, crazy thing. Yeah, we'll take a little closer look at that a little later on. Okay, we run 9 artifacts in the deck, pretty standard artifact package. We have Mana Crypt Soul Ring for early game ramp. Chromatic Lantern allows us to use any of our lands to tap for any color, in addition to it being able to tap for any color. Obelisk Jund taps for all 3 of our colors. Astronaut's Altar and Phyrexian Altar both function as a little bit of ramp as well as a sacrifice outlet. They're also both pieces in our infinite combo. Panharmonicon basically functions as a second copy of Doubling Season in the deck. Aetherworks Marvel allows us to get some card advantage because we're going to be sacrificing a lot of creatures. And Coat of Arms is our backup strategy in case we need to swing with our tokens. This makes them all really, really big. We run 15 enchantments in the deck. We run a fairly decent-sized enchantment package. Vampiric Rites allows us to cash in our tokens for cards and life. Cryptolith Rite turns those tokens into mana dorks. Goblin Bombardment is a way to weaponize our tokens. Sylvan Library is going to allow us to dig a little deeper into our library a little more quickly, especially helpful when you're a combo deck. Impact Tremor is another way to weaponize our tokens. Awakening Zone will produce tokens that will ramp us a bit as well. Food Chain is it's probably the biggest combo piece in the deck. We don't have to have it to win, but if we do, it's the quickest way to win. Song of the Dryads is just incredible removal. Single target removal deals with pretty much anything on the board needed to turn it something, or get rid of something, turn it into a forest, turn it into a tree. Fecundity is going to allow us to draw a lot of cards. It is a global effect, but we're going to be sacrificing more creatures than anybody else, so we should benefit from it more. Parallel Lives doubles the number of tokens that enter the battlefield when we cast Prossh or any other source that creates tokens. Grave Pact is our edict effect. Whenever we sack a creature, everybody else is going to have to sack a creature as well. Mana Echoes is going to produce an insane amount of mana for us. From Beyond, basically another copy of Awakening Zone, going to produce some 1/1 Eldrazi Signs that we can sack for mana. This will also allow us to sack the enchantment itself to go and get an Eldrazi card and put it into our hand, which isn't being used in this particular build. However, there is a build that I'm toying with that uses Eternal Scourge that can be cast from exile that will produce us some infinite mana if we have Food Chain on the battlefield. But I'm not running that currently, thinking about putting it in. For now, this is basically just like a second copy of Awakening Zone. It's a great way to produce some tokens for us and ramp us a bit. Dictate of Erebos, another Dictate effect, or Edict effect. Doubling Season, everybody knows what Doubling Season does. It goes pretty crazy in this deck, especially if we have a way to weaponize our tokens. We run 5 instants, and mainly they're here for disruption and tutoring. Hero's Downfall will instant speed destroy a target creature or planeswalker. Jund Charm can do a few different things, but its main purpose in the deck is Graveyard Hate. Court of Calling will allow us to tutor a creature directly onto the battlefield, and since it has Convoke, it allows us to turn our tokens into mana-producing little mana dorks, basically, to be able to go and get any creature, put it straight onto the battlefield. Worldly Tutor, instant speed, tutor up a creature and put it on top of your library. Hero allows us to go and get us a couple basic lands to put them onto the battlefield. We run 13 sorceries in the deck. Reanimate's going to allow us to recur a creature if we need to, or we're going to be having, hopefully, quite a lot of sacking going on, so that with our Edict effects, everybody else is going to be doing the same, so hopefully we'll be able to see some pretty big things in other people's graveyards. This will allow us to go get something that looks nice and tasty from theirs as well. Demonic Tutor, tutors for any card, puts it directly into our hand. Toxic Deluge, one of the most efficient board wipes in the game. Spoils of Victory ramps us a bit. Gerard's Orders, another tutor that puts a creature into our hand and one into our graveyard, which means basically in this deck says go get any one creature to put in your hand and go get Anger and put it in your graveyard. Okay, Shamanic Revelation and Collective Unconscious both draw us a card for each creature we control. Shamanic Revelation is a little bit more efficient at 5 mana and will also potentially allow us to gain some life. Behold the Beyond at 7 mana allows us to discard our hand and search our library for any 3 cards and put them into our hand. So we get any 3 combo pieces we need and we go off. Degree of Pain is a board wipe that also ends up drawing us quite a few cards. You can cycle it for a mini board wipe if you need to as well. Blasphemous Act, also another board wipe. With how many creatures that we're going to be producing with our tokens, it's often going to be cast for a single red mana. We also run Green Sun Zenith, another way to, at sorcery speed, tutor a creature directly onto the battlefield. Profane Command offers some different options for us. We can use it as a big X finisher for a single player. We can recur a creature card from our graveyard to the battlefield. We can use it as a single target removal, or we can give a number of creatures fear. And then Fireball is another way to deal a great big one-turn win if we can produce infinite mana, which we have many, many ways to do in this deck. Okay, we run 4 Planeswalkers in the deck. Xenagos the Reveler mainly is here for his +1, although his 0 ability can put some creatures onto the battlefield if we need tokens. His ultimate is good, although we hardly ever will use it. Mainly, like I said, he's here for that +1. If we have cast Prossh, we put him out and plus him. We're going to be adding 7, 8, 9, 10 mana often to our mana pool, so that's awesome. Freyalise, Llanowar's Fury, great little toolbox. Planeswalker here. Her +2 creates a mana dork. -2 destroys artifact or enchantment, and -6 draws some cards. Liliana Vess is mainly here to tutor for us. She tutors cards at the top of our library, but if we can manage to +1 her, or if we have Doubling Season out, and then her ultimate can be an alternate win con as well. Vrask of the Unseen, her -3 is great to be able to destroy any target non-land permanent, and she's a really, really fun alternate win con as well. If you can take her up, or if you have a Doubling Season out, it's interesting to be able to get her up to 7 or beyond, cast a board wipe, and then ultimate her to create her 3 black assassin creatures. And if you have Anger in your graveyard or some other hasty enabler, then you can swing for the win against the other 3 opponents. So that's kind of a fun little way to win the game every now and then. Here we run 16 actual creatures, then we also have our 2 creature lands. We'll talk about those in a second. Zulaport Cutthroat is a way to weaponize our tokens, or especially weaponizing the destruction of our tokens. Sakura Tribell ramps us a bit. Blood Artist, another way to weaponize the sacrificing of our tokens. Eternal Witness, going to recur cards from our graveyard to our hand. Goblin Sharpshooter is a way to weaponize our token production as well. Quagmire Druid is a way to use our tokens to destroy enchantments. Stronghold Assassin, we trade tokens for creatures. Ogre Battle Driver, if he's on the battlefield, it's a great way for us to produce a bunch of tokens and then swing out for a win. Purphoros is the most efficient way to weaponize our token production. He's pretty awesome. Just casting Prossh one time with him on the board does 14 damage to the entire table. If you have a Panharmonicon out, you actually can kill the entire table, because Prossh will produce 12 tokens, and then Purphoros will trigger twice for each of those tokens and twice for Prossh. So you're looking like 60 damage if you have both of those on the board. So, yeah, very, very powerful way to weaponize our tokens here. Anger's a haste enabler to get into the graveyard with a mountain into play, and all your creatures have haste. Glissa Sunseeker's here to destroy artifacts. Falcon Wrath Noble, another way to weaponize our token sacrifice. Acidic Slime deals with artifacts, enchantments, and lands. Sidisi's here as a tutor. We can usually exploit one of our tokens to go and get anything from our library. Butcher of Malakir is another edict effect, and Terracodon is a great way to deal with up to 3 non-creature permanents. You do give them the elephants, the 3/3 elephant tokens, but I'll gladly give somebody an elephant to get rid of a problematic enchantment or something along those lines. Now we also run our 2 creature lands. Hissing Quagmire becomes a 2/2 Death Touch black-green elemental creature. And Westvale Abbey transforms into Ormondal Profane Prince, a 9/7 flying, life-linked, indestructible, hasty creature. So let's take a look at the stats here in the deck. We have 8 early ramp spells and 8 mid to late game ramp spells, 7 card draw spells, and 8 others that give us some general card advantage. 8 tutors in the deck, 16 pieces of disruption, including, or in addition to 3 edicts, and 5 recursion cards. So our early game ramp includes our Mana Crypt and our Soul Ring, and our Obelisk of Jund that will produce any of the colors that we need for the Obelisk of Jund. Same thing with Chromatic Lantern. Awakening Zone will produce our tokens that we can then sack for colorless mana. We also have Sakura Tribe Elder to go and get a basic land. Spoils of Victory gets any named land, and Haro can give us 2 basics. For mid to late game ramp, Cryptolith, although it comes down on turn 2 or 3, we really don't start using it until we cast Prossh for the first time. So you're looking at turn 5, turn 4, turn 5, turn 6, somewhere in that general range. But once you get to that point, then it's explosive. You have almost unlimited mana at that point. Phyrexian Altar sacrifices our creatures for colorless mana. Food Chain, we'll see how it works here in a moment. Ashnod's Altar is another piece of our infinite combo. Mana Echoes produces huge amounts of mana, and we'll see an example of that here in a few moments. From Beyond, as we said earlier, it's just like another copy of Awakening Zone. Xenagos gives us mana for our tokens, and Freelise produces tokens that tap for mana. For card draw, we've got Vampiric Rites. We're going to trade our tokens for cards. Sylvan Library lets us dig nice and deep. And then if we need additional cards from those ones that we draw, the extra cards, we can pay life to keep those cards. Fecundity, with the amount of tokens that we're going to be sacrificing, we can pretty much draw as many cards as we need. Very rarely that you're not going to be able to get some card draw out of this. That's going to benefit you way more than the rest of the table. As we said earlier, Shamanic Revelation, Collective Unconscious, both sorceries that draw us cards based on the number of creatures that we control, and Decree of Pain will do it based on the number of creatures we destroy. It's kind of interesting. Freylise, Atlantis War's Fury, her ultimate draws us cards for green creatures, which is a little limited in this deck. We don't have a huge amount of green creatures, but they are there, especially if we're generating some green token creatures with Freylise or with Xenagos the Reveler. For card advantage, we have our 3 temples and the Mosswort Bridge. Xenagos can also, if he ultimates, we can get 7 cards off our library and get any number of creatures or land cards and throw them onto the battlefield. And Aetherworks Marvel is going to let us play a lot of free cards. For tutors, we have Worldly Tutor that gets it to the top of the library, and then Court of Calm that gets it onto the battlefield. Demonic Tutor puts a card directly into her hand. Gerard's Orders gets a creature into her hand and one to the graveyard. Green Sun Zenith puts a green creature directly into the battlefield. And Behold the Beyond trades our hand for any 3 cards in her deck. Liliana Vest gives us any card at the top of our library, and Sidisi Undead Vizier will give us any card into our hand. For disruption, Song of the Dryads turns anything into a tree, which is great. Vraska can destroy any non-land permanent. Terracodon to deal with non-creature permanents. Acidic Slime deals with artifacts, enchantments, or lands. Freylise is -2, destroys artifacts and enchantments. Glissa Sunseeker for dealing with artifacts. And Quagmire Druid for dealing with enchantments. Jund Charm mainly here for dealing with graveyards, although the 2 damage to each creature could deal with a small token army if you needed to. Toxic Deluge, as we said a second ago, lets us use our life total to become the most efficient board wipe in the game. The Decree of Pain, destroy all creatures that can't be regenerated, or we can cycle it for a mini board wipe, very similar to what Jund Charm would do. And then Blasphemous Act doing 13 damage to each creature, with it costing 1 less for each creature in the battlefield, often means that this is going to be a single red for a board wipe. Okay, here's Downfall, targeted removal at instant speed, deals with creatures and planeswalkers, and we've already gone over the different options for Profane Command. Now, Goblin Bombardment, Goblin Sharpshooter, and Fireball are actually intended to be win conditions in the deck. However, they can target individual creatures, so keep that in mind that they can be used for problematic creatures as well. And then our 3 Edict effects, well, they don't necessarily target. They do cause people to sacrifice, which oftentimes is better, especially if you're dealing with indestructible creatures. And if we're sacrificing the number of creatures that we typically do in this deck, we should be able to keep the rest of the board fairly clear. Okay, for recursion, we have Volrath Stronghold, gets a creature card from our graveyard to the top of our library. Reanimate gets any creature from our library or anybody else's. Turn of Witness gets any card from our library. And then Liliana Vest, her ultimate can recur creature cards from all graveyards. So that can be a very, very powerful effect. And then Profane Command gets something from our graveyard and puts it onto the battlefield. Okay, let's take a look at our token generators that we have here on the deck. We obviously know that we have Prossh. Prossh is an incredibly efficient generator. One of the few generals that you're going to want to have going back to the command zone over and over again, since the more he costs, the more he creates. So we definitely want to keep that in mind. He's our primary token generator. We also have Xenagos, Freyalise, and Vraska that they can produce tokens. It's not their primary function in the deck, but they can. Awakening Zone and From Beyond are going to be giving us tokens that can ramp us or be used for other shenanigans. And then these 3 cards, Panharmonica, Parallel Lives, and Doubling Seasons, while they don't produce tokens themselves, they put our token production on steroids. Okay, so once we're producing all of these tokens, how are we going to use them? Well, other than just swinging out with tokens, we're going to try to find different ways that we can use them as a resource in the deck. So we can use Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, or Food Chain to turn those tokens into mana. Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar, you sacrifice them to get either colored mana or colorless mana. Food Chain is interesting in that you basically exile a creature and it gets X mana into your mana pool in any color, and X is the converted mana cost of the creature plus 1. So since tokens have a 0 CMC, every token that we exile is basically going to give us 1 mana of any color. Now, that mana can only be used to play creature spells, but generally that's not that big a deal. Okay, we also have other ways to use our tokens. Vampiric Rites is going to allow us to change our tokens into cards and life. Goblin Bombardment, we can sacrifice them for direct damage, so it's a way to weaponize our token production. Quagmire Druid allows us to exchange tokens for to destroy enchantments. Stronghold Assassin, same thing with non-black creatures, and Sidisi allows us to use them to tutor cards. And then we can use our tokens also, sacrifice 5 of them to the Westvale Abbey to create Ormondal Profane Prince. So sacrifice outlets are very important in the deck. We run 8 direct sacrifice outlets and then 3 other cards that have a sacrifice component to them. First one to talk about is Prossh himself. Prossh having that third ability, sacrifice another creature. Prossh gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Having a sack outlet built into your commander is an incredible tool to have. Then we also have the Ashnod's Altar, Phyrexian Altar, Goblin Bombardment, Vampiric Rites, Stronghold Assassin, Quagmire Druid, and Westvale Abbey, all of which have some component on them that require you to sacrifice creatures, so they become sacrifice outlets. Sidisi Undead Vizier, it's not an on the battlefield constantly able to use it as a sacrifice outlet type of card, but it does sacrifice a single creature that we can use for a resource. And then Food Chain, you're technically not sacrificing them, but you're using them in a very similar manner. The key to remember here is that the tokens and creatures in general that you use with Food Chain's ability never hit the graveyard, so they don't necessarily trigger things like your Edict effects. So that's something to remember. So if we're going to be doing a lot of sacrificing of creatures, we want some cards that are going to give us some benefit for doing all of that sacrificing. We've already talked about our 3 edicts, so as we're sacrificing creatures, we're going to force our opponents to do the same. And then Fecundity and Aetherworks Marvel are going to get us cards either onto the battlefield or into our hand. So with all of that in mind, let's start to take a look at the combo win con here in the deck. Now, there are a number of different ways to assemble the machine that will become our combo win con. But here is the basic gist of how it works. We're going to figure out ways to cast and recast Prossh repeatedly. Hopefully we can do this infinite times. From that point, we need a way to weaponize our token production and sacrifice, and we need a sacrifice outlet. So how are we going to cast and recast Prossh? Well, there's a number of ways we can do this. The number one way is food chain. With food chain on the battlefield by itself, you can cast Prossh an infinite number of times. So once you can do that, because basically what happens is you exile Prossh and you get 7 mana, and you already have at least 6 other tokens on the battlefield you can sacrifice or you can exile for 1 mana apiece. And since every time you cast them, he creates more, you're always going to have an endless supply of mana to be able to continually recast them. So once you can do that, all you need is a way to weaponize that production. But let's take a look at that in action. So when you have food chain on the battlefield, after you've cast Prossh 1 time, you have him on the battlefield as well as 6 kobolds of Kher keep. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to exile Prossh to food chain for 7 mana. We get that number by looking at his 6 CMC plus 1, which is what food chain tells us to do. We're also going to exile 1 token to food chain for 1 mana. So it's a 0 CMC creature plus 1. So now we have 8 colored mana in our mana pool. We can do it of any color. So we'll say 3 green, 3 red, and 2 black. Why not? As long as you have 1 of each of the 3 colors, that's all that matters. So we're going to use that 8 mana to recast Prossh. He's going to enter the battlefield and create 8 more tokens, now bringing our token count to 13 total tokens. So now we're going to exile Prossh to food chain again for 7 mana, or 6 plus 1, like we did before. Now this time, though, instead of costing 8, it's going to cost us 10 mana. So we have 7 in our mana pool now, and hey, look, we have 10 tokens. So we're going to exile 3 of those tokens to food chain for 3 more mana, bringing the total mana in mana pool to 10. We're going to recast Prossh using that 10 mana. And he's going to enter the battlefield and create 10 more tokens. So now we have him and 20 kobolds on the battlefield. You can repeat this as many times as you like to generate infinite tokens and infinite colored mana. Now again, thing to remember, with food chain, that mana has to be spent to cast a creature spell. So in this particular combo, we're going to need a way to turn these creatures into damage in some way. We're going to take a look at that here in just a few minutes. So another card that we can use, interesting, is Mana Echoes. The Mana Echoes at 2 and 2 red is an enchantment. Whenever a creature comes into play, you may add 1 colorless to your mana pool for each creature you control that shares a creature type with it. So basically what happens is when Mana Echoes is on the battlefield and you cast Prossh, each kobold enters the battlefield and sees 5 other kobolds. Now, Mana Echoes then generates 5 colorless mana for each kobold. So you have 6 kobolds total. It means you generate 30 colorless mana. So you spend 6 and you get back 30. Now, if we have a Phyrexian altar on the battlefield, this will allow us to go infinite. So what we're going to do is we're going to sack Prossh and 2 kobolds for a red, a green, and a black. So now we have 30 colorless mana in our mana pool, 1 green, 1 black, and 1 red. We're going to recast Prossh using 5 colorless and the 3 colored mana from our mana pool. Prossh comes into the battlefield, it makes 8 more kobolds. Each of those 8 kobolds enters the battlefield and sees 11 other kobolds. So Mana Echoes is going to put 11 mana for each of our new tokens. That's a total of 88 more mana into our mana pool. So now, upon casting Prossh a second time, we now have Prossh, 12 tokens, and 113 colorless mana in our mana pool. You can repeat this as many times as you like to generate infinite tokens and infinite mana. Now, Ashnod's Altar can take the place of Mana Echoes. It takes a little longer to get there, but if you can do it once, it becomes infinite, so it doesn't really matter. So we find ourselves in this situation after casting Prossh 1 time. We have Prossh in the battlefield with 6 tokens, Ashnod's Altar and Phyrexian Altar. You sacrifice Prossh and 2 kobolds to the Phyrexian Altar for a red, a green, and a black. We then sack 3 more kobolds to Ashnod's Altar for 6 colorless mana. because this time our second casting of Prossh is going to cost us 5 colorless, a red, a green, and a black. So we're going to sack 3 kobolds to make 6 colorless mana. We'll recast Prossh using 5 colorless and the 3 colored mana in our mana pool. Prossh enters and creates 8 more kobolds. Now we still have 1 colorless mana in our mana pool. So we're going to sack Prossh and 2 kobolds to the Phyrexian altar for our red, green, and black again. And now this time we're going to need 7 colorless mana. So we already have 1. So we're going to sack 3 kobolds to Ashnod's altar to create the other 6. And then we're going to recast Prossh again. This time creating 10 more kobolds. And just like before, we can repeat this process as many times as we like to generate infinite tokens and mana. So once we can do this, what we need to be able to do is weaponize our token production and token sacrifice. Now we have a number of ways to do that. Zulaport Cutthroat does it. Zulaport Cutthroat and Blood Artist both do it when creatures leave the battlefield, in particular. Goblin Bombardment, you sacrifice the creatures to the Goblin Bombardment to deal a damage. Impact Tremors does a damage to each opponent whenever a creature enters the battlefield. Goblin Sharpshooter, you tap it to deal a damage, and then every time a creature dies, you untap them. So you can tap to deal a damage, sack a creature for whatever effect, untap the Sharpshooter, tap it again, and do that over and over again. Perforos ends the game very, very quickly. And Falcon Wrath Noble is another way, it's just basically just like Blood Artist and Zulaport Cutthroat. So what happens if we can't get there with our combo? Usually you can, but what happens if the combo gets blown up or something along those lines? Well, we're going to go to our aggro win con instead. For that, we're going to need Anthem effects for our tokens, we're going to need haste enablers, and some way to use tokens to buff other creatures. So Coat of Arms functions very similar to Mana Echoes in that each creature counts the number of other creatures it shares a type with it, and then gets +1/+1 for how many other ones there are. So, for example, if we have 6 kobolds, each one looks and sees 5 others, so they're going to get +5/+5. Anger is a haste enabler, puts in our graveyard when we have a mountain. And then Ogre Battlefield pumps our tokens the first turn they come in and gives them haste as well. Another win cons that we have. Well, we can go Voltron with Prossh, as we talked about before, sacrifice tokens to pump them up to 21. Now, I would mainly use this if you have one particular opponent that's causing problems in some way or another. Maybe they have something that keeps you from recurring things, or something that keeps you from sacrificing things. There's a number of different ways that they could do that. So if that happens, you can go Voltron. Just keep hitting them with a big 5/5 flyer until they're done. The other way is Burn, especially with Mana Echoes. Although there's a number of ways to create infinite mana. If we can create infinite mana, we can just fireball everybody and win in one turn as well. Liliana Vess and Vraska the Unseen can also put either, like Liliana Vess puts all the creatures from all graveyards on the battlefield under our control, or Vraska creates the assassins that the other people die when they get hit by them. So now that we've taken a look at all the cards of the deck, let's take a look at some of the reasons why I like this deck so much. Like as I said before, it has some nostalgia because it was my very first deck. But beyond that, it's a pretty powerful deck. This is probably my most competitive deck. I'm not really an uber competitive player. I like to win and I like to have good gameplay, but I'm not the person that's trying to win on turn 3 or turn 4 every single time. But that being said, this deck can win very, very quickly and can win out of nowhere. And that's one of the things I like about it, is that it can be very sneaky in that you look like you have a decent board state, and then all of a sudden you win the game. So that's kind of nice. It's a very versatile commander. Lots of different ways to build the deck. Like I said, I've focused on the combo aspect, but there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. It recovers very well from board wipes. You want this commander to go back to the command zone, because every time you cast them for more mana, you get more tokens, and that's exactly what you're trying to do. And then, as I said a second ago, it's able to just win out of nowhere, and it's a lot of fun. I've really, really enjoyed playing this deck over the years that I've been playing it, and I plan to continue to play it and evolve it. In fact, I've talked earlier in the video about one particular change that I'm thinking of with Eternal Scourge, and there's another one I'm going to talk about right now as well. Now, Eternal Scourge, the big thing with him is that you can cast him from exile. So if you have Food Chain on the battlefield, you exile it for 1 extra mana than it costs to cast it, then you recast it from exile, and you loop that as many times as you want to produce infinite mana. So that's a pretty good little thing you can do with the deck, and I'm thinking about throwing that in. And another card that considering there's numerous ways to produce infinite mana, Walking Ballista, the new card from Aether Revolt, is an XX creature that enters the battlefield with X+1/+1 counters on it, and then you can remove counters to do damage. So since we can produce infinite mana, that becomes a pretty good win con. So those are two changes that I'm considering making. If I do, I'll play it a little bit, and I'll come back and I'll create a little update video to let you know what I took out to be able to put those cards in, and how it plays out with the new cards. In the meantime, thanks a lot for tuning in. Be sure to crush that subscribe button down there for new content as it comes out. What I have in the pipeline right now is I have a deck tech for my Daxos Enchanted deck, which is another modified precon. That one was pretty heavily modified right from the very beginning. It's a fun sort of Pillow Forte kind of deck. So that's going to be coming up pretty soon. You also start to take a look for some update videos for the deck techs that we already produced. So like I said, subscribe, like, comment below. Let me know if you have any questions or any suggestions for any of the decks. And hopefully we'll see you and interact with you down in the comments below. Keep tapping all of the cards, having all of the fun, and playing all of the EDH. See ya!